This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this StockBox interview.
Here in person with Nick Tulloch, of course, the CEO of Mendel Helium at the Aquas Exchange event today. Nick, good to see you in person again. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. It's been a very, very good event, actually.
It's been a good event, hasn't it? Yeah, I was pretty surprised, actually, the number of people that turned up. I know the guys said it was oversubscribed, but I saw them putting out more chairs again as the day went on. So I think that speaks really good for the sector in general. Of course, you know, all this talk about Aquis not being the most liquid, you know, here, you wouldn't believe it, would you? There was lots of people here, lots of interest in what was going on.
And a good cross-section as well. So obviously, as the companies that were presenting, we've had investors, advisors. I've had some really good conversations. I wasn't quite sure when it would finish, but I guess as you can see, it's sort of over. But there's still a lot of people going, so it's been terrific, actually. Really
and there's a networking event going on now, isn't there? And I sort of had to pull you away. So people are chatting to you. They're interested in the story.
Well, I mean, I'm rather pleased. I mean, I kind of want to say so they should be. We think it's a pretty good story, and we've had a lot of announcements in the last week. Very deliberately so. We've had a lot of news flow and a lot of events within the company, so we're really getting quite a head of steam up.
Good. Well, of course, in your presentation you talked about sort of the three company makers, didn't you? The first one, of course, being that agreement that was announced recently with Scouts there for the onshore producing helium in Kansas there, and that access straight to Jayhawk. One thing I wasn't aware of, that you said Jayhawk produced 4% of the world's helium, so that's quite a lot, isn't it?
Well, it really is. I mean, Scout Energy is not a name that people in the UK are necessarily familiar with, but over in Kansas, it is the name. This is the biggest producer in that part of the region. So they have the top end of the Hugoton fields. So Hugoton runs from Kansas to Oklahoma through Texas. Scout have got 1 million acres. But I guess the jewel in the crown is the Jayhawk processing plant, which is a mile across. So if you walk from one end to the other, it takes 20 minutes. I mean, that is the scale of it. And right next to it is Lindy's helium plant. So this is sort of, helium central, if you're looking for sort of, the right postcode to be in. But you're right, Jayhawk does 4% of the world's helium. Scout is the second biggest producer of helium in the US. So this is a real sort of David and Goliath moment. Little company like us, and we are a small business, but here we are together with Scout and with a right of first refusal over 1 million acres in Kansas.
And you've kind of come into this, of course, the transition from Voyager Life as it was to now Mendel Helium here, really rapid progress. I mean, what's it like? I mean, how have you done it? It's just the Scottish charm, I don't know.
Do you know, there probably is an element of that. I'm sure over in Dallas at the moment, the Scout guys must be saying, this British guy keeps turning up. I mean, he's kind of weird, isn't he? But let's do business with him and see what happens. I do stand out. I mean, just the way I speak over in Texas, it's different. Our approach is quite different. I think they quite like the fact they're dealing with a listed company. Scout is a private equity-backed business, so they get that sort of vicarious publicity through things like we're doing just now. And it's been a really good relationship. So I made a point of whenever I go to the States, I now stop off in Dallas. I see the guys from Scout, and we just gently built that relationship. I mean, we talk quite regularly. And again, what's this big company doing talking to the small company? But we can perhaps offer them something that they need, which is more production to fill that massive plant that's called Jayhawk.
So you're waving that flag, you're kindling that special relationship that Britain has with our friends across the pond.
Well, look, the Labour Party may have made a complete mess of it, but here at Mendel Helium, we're doing our very best to keep relationships going.
Good. And a part of that deal, so am I right, you've got access to over 160 acres of land, but you've also got first right of refusal over a further 1 million acres. So that's basically an option over 1 million acres, if you so wish, to drill and pump helium.
Exactly. So the initial deal, they talk in terms of townships, which are 36 square miles. So we have 7 townships, and that's where we get the 160 or 161,000 acres. That's where the farm-in starts, but it's an exclusive arrangement. And the way the deal is structured, if anyone else comes to Scout wanting to do something similar, because let's face it, we think the deal's quite good. If anyone else comes to Scout, they have to come to us first. So we have that free right, it is free, we haven't paid for anything yet, we have that free right of first refusal over 1 million acres. And this is not just 1 million acres of scrub, this is 1 million acres of a Hugoton, which is one of the oldest and probably one of the best known gas fields in the world. It's been producing for 90 years, it's very, very prospective. I mean, anyone can get things wrong, anyone can drill a dry hole, but in the Hugoton, you'd be pretty unlucky not to get some sort of production.
Really?
So, our expectation is if we drill the 25 wells, which is the first commitment, we'd be very unlucky if we got nothing from them. as in from any individual well. I mean, of course, each well is going to sort of vary, but the land and the history there is such that it's very, very prospective for helium and natural gas.
So how expensive is it to drill 25 wells? Because obviously, once they're producing it, so it's not too bad, but drilling can get quite expensive, can't it?
It can, but I suppose the two things to counter that are Kansas is an oil and gas state, so there's a plentiful supply of drillers and equipment.
Okay.
And also these are relatively shallow wells. We're talking about sort of 3,000 foot or just over 3,000 foot. We've been quoting it around about $300,000 per well.
Okay.
But in fact, we wouldn't just go well by well. We'd set out a program. So probably we'd be drilling in batches of 3s, 5s, 7s. And if we do that, we think the price will come down very significantly.
Okay.
Maybe by around about sort of 25 to 30% off that headline number.
Okay. When would you look to perhaps get this drilling started? I know we're probably getting ahead of ourselves here. You're just getting helium producing, selling it to Jayhawk. You've of course got the other areas, well, Hugoton, of course, the big frack. But sort of bigger picture, what are we talking here? And funding that as well, of course, is something to concern about.
Yeah, I think for us it's not a major concern because the way the Scout deal is structured is we don't have to pay anything until we start drilling. I mean, not that we're going to do this, but if we decide actually we don't fancy this, we're just going to walk away, there is no penalty. So we can just say to Scout, thank you, but it's not for us, and it doesn't cost us anything. In terms of when we start, I mean, I'm naturally impatient. I'd like to be out in the field tomorrow. Realistically, it's probably more likely the end of the period, so we have until March to start. The weather in Kansas, I'm told, gets pretty cold in January and February, meaning it will be more expensive. There's a higher risk of things breaking, vehicles getting stuck. So the smart move is probably to start in March. Okay. So we have a little bit of time. We have an RTO to finish off as well, an admission document to publish. So maybe having spent the last sort of 3 or 4 months really building our profile in Kansas, I guess the announcements demonstrate how we built that process. The next stage is to complete the RTO, and then, as you say, start the drilling process.
So the commitment is to start something before the end of March?
The 31st of March is the deadline.
That's not that long away, really, is it, either? I mean, are you able to actually start? Do you need to go to the market for funds, or...?
Well, I suppose the two things are to mobilise the drilling crews, and we've already started the process of going out to the drilling contractors and the various other subcontractors we'll need to build a team to do this work. And it's going to be a sort of 12 to 15 month programme to drill those first few wells, and that's before we get onto the extension. In terms of funding, we've been very successful lately raising money from local investors. So the Nilsen Frack, which I guess we'll also talk about in a bit, all of that was funded from local investors. People like what we're doing. I mean, the feedback we've had in Kansas for the deal we've done with Scout, I mean, people are saying, oh my God, this is extraordinary. I mean, no one's ever done this before.
Right.
And in the end, this is back to my David and Goliath moment. Little companies don't get to deal with big companies, except every rule has an exception, and here we are.
There we are. So these local investors, then, let's just talk about that a little bit more, because that is important for the third company maker, the big frack, as you say. I think so you gave away 25% of that project, to local US investors.
We did. So Nilsen was a well we had, actually when we agreed to buy M3 Helium, Nilsen was an existing well, and it was going fine, but what we were noticing is that as the water was coming off, we were getting higher production, and so it's quite a dense rock there. It's 0.6% helium, but the flow rates were such that we could see there was an interesting, I guess, combination between dewatering the well and the increased production. So we took the decision to do what we're calling a big frack. It was about 5 times the size of the original frack on Nilsen. Something that's not really been done in the Hugoton. And the Hugoton, as I say, it's been quite a safe place for oil and gas operators. So generally you're going to get some production. It's fairly low pressure, but it's fairly dependable. So we took the decision to do this big frack and really open up what we had beneath the well. And the results have been fascinating. So typically you'd expect after a frack, you'd expect production to spike and then to tail off. If you look at the graph that we put out in our announcement, in fact yesterday, so on Monday, we've got the opposite. Our production is rising, and it's rising by almost an MCF per day, so almost 1,000 cubic feet per day. Or if you prefer, it's rising by 1 cubic foot per minute. Now that is increased production, so whatever we had before, another 1 cubic foot per minute. Okay. Wells don't perform like that, so we've got that sort of defying gravity moment. Now, the most analogous well we can find to what we've done peaked at 8 months. So at the moment, we're sort of in the low 50s in terms of MCF production per day. if we carried on at the same rate, and if 8 months was the peak, we'd be looking at something like 300 MCF per day. Now you've got one of the best wells in the Hugoton. Right. So if we can repeat that across the Scout farm-in, then you've got a really interesting plan where you're looking at a much faster payback than other people getting in the Hugoton.
Okay. And how does it work with actually getting local investors involved? Do you start a company there that then shares in that company are then sold to the local investors?
No, they actually buy into the well. And this is quite common. I mean, we don't really have much of an onshore oil and gas capability in the UK, but over in the US it's quite common for people to buy into shares of the well.
Really?
And so this is exactly what we've done. We've sold a series of shares.
The money take a percentage of the profits from that well production.
Literally. So they funded the frack, and so we had a sunk cost. No pun intended. We had a sunk cost in the well. They funded the frack in entirety.
Okay.
That earned them in 25% of the well, and going forward, whatever the well produces, a quarter belongs to those new investors.
It's quite cool, actually, isn't it? Like if you're in that area and you're into that sector and you want to sort of these guys are going to be doing a frack or drilling a new well. Yeah, why not? Let's have a go. That's quite a cool thing. That is an alien concept to us Brits.
It doesn't exist here, but what it means for us is this big frack was experimental. This has not been done for tens of years in the Hugoton.
Yeah.
So obviously we were confident, otherwise we wouldn't have done it. But it could have gone either way. The fact that it was successful, well, first of all, paves the way for future wells, but also the fact that other investors prepared to back us. It kind of shows that we weren't just sort of the mad guys out on our own. What we're doing, both at Nilsson and also elsewhere, is attracting real attention.
So you've got options, basically. You can do a similar model with local investors. You can go to the market if you need to here, and presumably you can reinvest funds from sales, which are currently happening, aren't they? I mean, do you have the figures to hand, or...?
It's quite small at the moment. So if you go to our website, we've started having sort of a rough sort of daily tally. So very roughly, and it does ebb and flow a bit, but very roughly at the moment we're doing about 130 MCF a day across all of our wells. Okay. Now most of our wells are about 0.6% helium, so investors can do that calculation. We've not spoken about it yet, but the Rost well is 5.1% helium, so that's sort of a different category altogether. Okay. But that's sort of roughly where we are.
Okay. You don't have to give me the answer, but how do you work out that calculation if people just want to do it on their calculators at home?
Well, 130 MCF times 0.6% times whichever helium price you think is appropriate for the day. What I would caution investors, though, is people do look at the spot price. I mean, that's always the temptation on any commodity. You look at the spot price. The helium market is quite a young market, and there's only 1% of helium in the world that gets sold at the spot price. Most of it's forward sold. So there's some very big numbers bandied around. I don't think that's a realistic price level to plan a business. Actually, on the Scout deal, we have fixed the price. We think helium prices have fallen over the last few months, so we've locked in a price that gives us the ability to plan our business going forward, and that's probably where I'd encourage investors to look.
Okay, thank you. We'll just finish off on the Hugoton, and of course this is the second part of the company makers. So this is where you're too far from the network, but you're using the PSA to truck the helium to the network gathering system. But your engineer made a comment that you're going to need a bigger PSA.
It's like the comment from Jaws, isn't it? You'll need a bigger boat. So this is the Rost well. It's just near Dodge City. So if you've been to sort of Wyatt, that's Dodge City. It's just about sort of 3 miles to the east of that. This is the well that's got 5.1% helium. But better than that, it's a very high pressure well. And again, I suppose the lesson for investors, it's very easy to get carried away by the helium concentration. The value of a well is a combination of the helium concentration and the production. And what we've got from Rost is, we believe, a very high production capability. So it's produced at 47 MCF per day, but that's with over 1,000 foot of water sitting over the well perforations. Put that in context, the gas is coming out against 450 pounds per square inch of pressure. And we're still getting that level of gas. So in theory, take off the water, remove that pressure, and production should rise significantly. So the PSA you mentioned, that can cope with 750 MCF per day. But the indication I had 2 weeks ago when I was out in Kansas was it could exceed that. Now, we only published the tests that we've had verified independently. On our own tests, we have produced at Rost far, far higher than 750. So there's a lot to come, but take that water off and that Rost well could be very, very significant.
So what's the next 3 months look like then, before you look to perhaps drill more wells towards the end of March? What's the next 3 months looking like across those 3 company makers, or indeed, if you're going to bring a 4th arm in, the 5th branch, I don't know.
Well, I suppose Nilsson is a watch and wait. So the graph we published was up to Wednesday last week. It has continued to increase. In fact, it's increasing more and more each day. So if the graph carried on, you'd actually see a bit of an upturn in that graph. So Nielsen, we'll see where that finishes, but that's looking really very interesting and a very good plan for what we might do with Scout. I think the near-term cash generator is Rost. That's the helium concentration, the pressure. This could be extremely significant, both in terms of cash flow and in terms of helium production. So I think the coming months is probably about focusing on Rost, dewatering that well. And there's quite a lot of water that needs to come off, but the good news is we do have a disused oil well just a few hundred yards away that can be repurposed as a disposal well. Trucking water gets quite expensive if you're taking a lot of water off each time, but if you can use a disposal well, stating the obvious, you significantly reduce the cost. So I think Rost is probably where it's at in the near term. That will prove the capability of that particular region. That's a lot smaller than the Hugoton. We'll be looking at sort of 3 wells maximum, I would guess, in that area. But at the top end of my numbers, 3 wells. I mean, that's several multiples of our market cap. So there's quite a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you very much for your time, Nick Tulloch, the CEO of Mendel Helium.
Thank you, Mark.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stockboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.